Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the previous videos, we discussed about conditions, functions, loops, and the input function. So then also we decided to develop a guessing game using those concepts. Now, if you check the top right corner of your screen, you'll be seeing the links to those videos, so you can just check them out. So today we discuss about data structures in Python. Now, there are several built-in data structures in Python, like the list, the set, tuples, and also the dictionary. So we'll be discussing just two in this video, which is the list and the tuple. Now there are other data structures in Python that are not built in, like linked lists, like trees, binary trees, and all of that. So we'll be discussing that later in the series. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. So go ahead and create a file for us, just a simple file, .py. Okay, list.py. Now let's just take this to understand the basics of how lists work in Python. Now a list is basically a way of formatting your data into a set or a list of stuff. Now let's say the name of my variable, let's say I have my list, which is a variable name, equals. Now this is a way to initialize an empty list in Python. Now this is an empty list of objects. You can choose to provide values in the inputs, like 8, like 9.7. You can basically provide any type of data in a list. So now this is a list. When I try to print it, let's say print my list. Now when I run my code, we should have this cd lecture. So now Python 3. Now you can see we have the list is printed, right? So now basically you can add objects to list. There are a lot of features. You can add values. Let's say list, my list to append. Now the append adds the value you provide as an argument to the end of the list. So now let's see what happens when we try to run our code again. Now you can see we have 9 appended to the end. You can also say list.pop, my list in this case, .pop. Now what my list.pop does is it removes an element also from the end of the list. Now you can actually choose where my list.pop removes from. You can choose the index. Now the index is a way of finding values like positions inside of your list. Now for example, the first object of your list has index 0. That's the first object. The second object has index 1. Next has index 2. Now you can index objects by saying, let me try to print a single character or a single value from the list. When I say print my list and then square brackets. Now this is a way to index your list. Let me say square bracket of 0. So now this should print inside of my list. It should go ahead and look for the first value and then print it for me. So let me go ahead and run Python 3 list.py. So now you can see we have 0 was printed first. So now the first value of my list is 0. So if I go ahead and try, let's say 1, we should have 8, which is the second value. Let's say I try 3. That would be wrong basically, because the index of 3 is not existent. That's out of index out of range. So now you can see here it's raising the error, index error, list out of range, because I'm trying to access an index that is not existent. So let's go ahead and see what we can do with the pop of 0. So now the pop takes in an index of where to remove your object from. So let me go ahead and clear my screen and then say Python list.py. So now you can see the pop of 0 removes from the beginning, right? Since 0 index is the first value, it removes the first value. So now we don't have the 0 here anymore. Let's say pop 2. Now we don't have 9.7 anymore. So it removes from the index that you provide as input. So now the append also works something like this. Let's say 9 and 0. So let's see what happens when I run my code now. Oh, yeah, is it? It's not append. I got that wrong. Okay, it's not for that. Sorry. So now append just takes one input. There's another function I will try to get the name that takes in two inputs, one value for where to add to the function, and then the other value for the like variable you want to add to the list. So let's go ahead and learn some new things about lists. Now you can, there's one trick to generate list in Python actually. So let's go ahead and check that out. Now let's say new list equals I for I in range 10. So now this, let's just remove all of this. So now this line 1 would get me a list of numbers from 0 to 10 if that works properly. Let me go ahead and run my code again. Now we have 0 all the way through 10. So now this is called list comprehension. Then we loop through the values of 0 to 10 and we append it to the list inside of the square brackets. So let's go ahead, we messed around a little bit with list. Let's go ahead and see cool things that we can do with lists. So go ahead and write some functions to automate some tasks and see what we can do. So now let's say we want to print all of the values of a list, for example. Let's write the function for that. Now to write the function, we use the def keyword. Let's say print all, and then we'll provide a list as input. So my list. Now this function will be taking a list as input, right? So now we want to print all of the values of this function one after the other on different lines. So let's say for I in my list instead. So I got it wrong here, my list. So now for I in my list, print dot format I. So now let's agree that the list will contain only numbers. So that's why I use the D here as a decimal number. So now let's go ahead and create a list and use this function. So let's say we have new list equals a list of numbers. And now let's say print all of new list. Let's see what happens. Now you can see we have 0, 1, 2, 3 printed on new lines. So what we did here is this line here for I in my list, it loops through all the values of the list like one after the other. And for every iteration of the list, we have the value that is like current value stored in the I variable. So now we can loop through all of the list and use the formats to print each and every one of this out. Now there are various ways we could do this print. We could use the f string. Let's say we want to use the f string, and then here we'd use I. So this also works fine. Here now we have multiple numbers like 0, 0, 1, 1 because we are printing twice on each iteration. So this also works fine, but let's stick with this because here we can actually choose what type of data we want to print, like in this case decimal numbers. So let's say I try to print like 1.8 here, for example. You can see what happens. Now we are saying we are using %d for a float. So now we are trying to like print a decimal number, a number that's decimal point, a floating point value in this case, instead of a decimal number. So now it's raising an error for that. So that's why we can just keep it to numbers since we're going to be using that value. So now we have 0, 1, 2, 3. That works fine. Let's write a new function to solve some new problem. Let's check. Now let's write a function to get values from a list. Instead of using the normal indexing function, let's write our own indexing function. So let's say def get index. But now we want to write this function in a way that it does not just try to get the value if it does not exist. It checks first if the value is a valid value, like if the index is correct, before trying to return the index, so we don't have any errors flying around. So let's go ahead and say we want the list to work with, my list, and then the index to work with, index. So now we want to check first. Now there are only two types of values that will be considered invalid when indexing a list. Negative values, which we'll explain later, will be wrong, and then positive values also, values that are above the list, like the length of the list, will also be considered wrong. So let's go ahead and see what we can do there. So the first thing we want to do is actually check if the number is less than 1. So if index is less than, in this case, 0, yeah, because 0 is the least number you could get in a list. So now print invalid. So let me go ahead and remove this. So let me say get index new list, and then let's say -1. So here we would see that we have an error will be raised, invalid, because it's a negative number, right? So now let's go ahead and see how we can incorporate the one of a number that is actually greater than. But now before we can determine that this number is greater than the length of the list, we need to be able to find out the length of the list. Now that you can do using the let's go ahead and print that first before you use it in if condition. Print my list dot len, just of my list, yes. Now this function length of my list, len, it gets and returns to us the exact length of a list in Python. So let's see what happens when we run this. You can see we have 4 because we have 4 values in the list. So it returns and prints 4. So now, so we can use this value to actually check if and only if the index provided by the user is actually like over the list, then that will be returning like an index error, but we don't want that. So we check or index greater than or equals to length of my list. Now remember when I said list has 0 index, right? So now the first value is 0, or just let me just print this again so you can get what I'm saying. Print length of my list. And when I run this, you see we have 4. 4 is the total length of the list, right? In normal human sense. But now for the indexing, this is the 0 index, this is the 1 index, 2 index, and 3 index. So 4 in this case is actually an invalid number because it exceeds the index, but it's the number of length of the list. So that's why we are checking if it's equals to or greater than in this case. Not just greater than. We want to check if it's equals to or greater than, which in both cases would be invalid. So now let's try to use let's say 4 in this case instead of -1. 4 would also be considered invalid. So you can see that was invalid. So let's go ahead and get the value. Okay, so now let's say return, or first print my list of index. So now this should work properly. Invalid, yeah, because we are trying to get yeah, so here after saying this we should return first, so we don't continue to the rest of the code. Let's say when I run this now, we have invalid and it stops. But now let's say when I run with 2, for example, 2, that works. So let me just change these numbers to stop convincing us. Let's say I have 2 in index 0, 9 in index 2, and 4, then 7. So when I try this again, you see we have 4 because 4 is in index 2. Let's say when I try 1, we have 9. So that works properly. But now let's change the print to return so we can actually get the value back. Let me change this to return none as a non-value, but then this should return instead of print also. So return. And now we have a working function. So let's just go ahead and print in this place, print. So now when I run this, we should have, no, we don't want that. Oh, yeah. Get index and then my list index of 2, new list actually. So now when I run this again, we have 4 in index 2, we have 1, then we have 9 index 1. So that works properly also. So let's go ahead and create a new function. Let's say a function to replace an element inside of a list. So now what we want to do now is find an element, like we're going to get a function to change the value of an element in a list using the index. So now let's go ahead and write the function for that also. Def replace index. Now we'll be needing the list, of course, my list. We'll be needing the index and then the value to be replaced with. So now the first thing we want to do is also to check if the value or the index is not invalid. So I'll just go ahead and copy this and paste it here. Sorry. Yeah. So then we check if it's not invalid, then we try to replace the content of the list. So now what we just do here is my list of index equals value. Now what happens here is, as you understand, when we say my list of index, we are trying to get the value of the index, like the location of the value that we're trying to find. Then we are trying to change the value, like set the new value for it. So let's go ahead and see if this actually works properly. So let me say print let's return. Or do I actually need to return? No, let's try this first. Replace index new list. Now we want to change the value in index 0 to, let's say, 10, and now let's print new list. Let me go ahead and run my code. So now you can see we have, when we initialize the list, we had 2 in index 0, but now it's 10 because that worked properly. So now the value has been changed. Let's try index 1 or 2. Now we have 10 in place of index 2. So that works properly also. Let's go ahead and write one more function. Now let's learn one more trick before we go ahead and do that. Now let's say you have a list in Python, right? We want to print the reverse of that list. One thing you could do is actually like loop through the list, then go all the way back. Like something like this, for example. Let's say we don't want to print this list for I. You can create a new list, for example. Let's say new equals an empty list, then put it that way. So let's just say we're trying to print a list in reverse, right? So now the easiest way to do it in Python, like it's already implemented for us, we don't have to write a function for that. It's just one way to do my list, or new list in this case, the reverse. So now the reverse function just takes the entire list, turns it on its head, and then just continue going. Let's go ahead and see how this actually works out. To print new list. Okay, let's go ahead and run our code again. Now you can see we have 7, 10, 9, 2. So that works properly. Initially we had 2, 9, 10, 7, but now we have, it's been reversed. So let's write a function just to make things formal, I would say. So now we have new list or reverse. Or let's just try to print the reversed list instead. So my list, and then yeah. So what we want to do here is say my list the reverse. and then print. Or before that, let's print on different lines like the others. So let's say for I in my list, print so let's just say print reverse. Use the function print reverse new list. So let's see what happens. 7 10 9 2. So that works properly also. So let's go ahead and just understand how tuples also work. So tuples basically is almost the same thing as lists, just you cannot edit the value of tuples. Let's go ahead and see why that is. So let's create a new tuple. Let me just go ahead and blur this out. Okay. Now let's create a tuple. New tuple equals. Am I getting it right? In fact. Okay. So now this is one way to initialize a tuple, right? Having this a tuple is basically like a list, but now you cannot edit the content of a tuple. So let's try that. Let's try to just edit the contents of this tuple and see. So let's say new tuple of let's say 0 equals, let's say 19. So now you can see what happens when we try to run this code. Here you can see tuple objects does not support item assignment. So now Python doesn't really allow us to do any editing on a tuple. As you can see here, let's say we're trying to get the value instead. Let's say print new tuple 0. So that should work. So now you can see it's basically like a list, except you cannot edit it. So that will be all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you again. Goodbye, everyone.